you all for joining us. Columbian is pleased to welcome candidates for Vancouver Public Schools Board of Directors, Position 1. I'm Greg Jane. I'm the editorial page editor here at the paper. I believe you met the other editorial board members. We may or may not have a reporter sitting in on this meeting.
You're about to have one.
Okay, we are about to have a reporter sitting in on this meeting. Katie Gillespie will join us. She won't be asking questions in this form, but might want to speak with you afterwards. And just so you know, we are videotaping this. We will post it unedited on our website for the benefit of our readers. And with that, we'll go ahead and get started. We'll start with, take 1 to 2 minutes to introduce yourselves, give some brief background, and briefly explain why you are running for this position, and then we'll move on to some specific issues related to the race, and we'll start at this end.
Okay, great. My name is Sproul. I am a business professional and a BPS parent. I have 2 sons in the district, and then I additionally have a preschool daughter. So I have a good 15 years ahead of me within Vancouver Public Schools. My background is in marketing strategy and business development. I have an MBA with that degree. I've worked in 2 Fortune 500 companies, managing departments, and then I've transitioned to a local small business. My role in the small business, I wear lots of different hats, but I have a lot of experience with budgeting, forecasting, setting strategic goals. So I am coming to this position with a business background. I think that with the district with $560 million budget and one of the top employers in the county, it is important to have that strong business base. I also, though, have the insight of a parent. My boys have actually been in 3 different buildings within Vancouver Public Schools, and it's given me a lot of insights into the distinctions between the different school communities, but also what's going on a day-to-day basis. I am an active volunteer. About 4 years ago, I cut my hours back, so I'm a part-time. I work part-time, and then I do volunteer weekly, if not multiple times a week in the schools. I'm running specifically because we have an achievement problem in the district. Our students as a whole are underperforming their state peers, but anywhere, depending on grade level, 5 to 10 points. I think that's unacceptable. We have an achievement gap. Our Hispanic students, our low-income students, and our ELL students are not being served. Lastly, we have a regional disparity in our district. If you draw a line at 78th Street and you look at performance numbers north of 78th Street versus south of 78th Street, we are educating 2 different populations, and we have 2 different sets of performance data. So I think I'm running because we need a change in policies that address our changing demographics and also that addresses these achievement issues.
Okay, thank you. We'll get into some of the specifics.
Okay.
Caressa?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Caressa Milgrove. I'm also a mother of 2 little boys in the district. They're going into 4th and 1st grade, and they are the reason why I'm running. For the last couple of years, I have been working on the issue of lunch duration. When my first son started kindergarten, I realized that his school was giving 15 minutes for lunch. I talked to a lot of parents and realized this wasn't just a district-wide problem, but a statewide problem. The state law states that school lunch needs to be a reasonable amount of time to accommodate kids eating their complete meal and also practicing proper hygiene. And the CDC and USDA recommend a minimum of 20 minutes of seated time for lunch, which would mean the time that they're actually sitting at the table and eating after they've already gone through the line. And our schools are not meeting that. And so kids are put in this position where they're having to choose whether they get to eat their meal or if they have to go to the bathroom or whatever. They can't really do both. And that really, I see it as a symptom of a larger set of issues where a lot of time pressures have been put on other parts of the day, lunch has kind of been chiseled away, and student well-being is really not being focused on. And so that's why I really want to keep pursuing this issue, but all the other issues that kind of surround it, such as recess and making sure they have time for going outside and unstructured playtime. Additionally, I'm also the student coordinator of American Democracy Project at WSU Vancouver. And with that, my whole job is to try and get students engaged in civic engagement. And what I'm finding is a lot of adults don't really know how their government works or who their representatives are. And I think that that is a failure of civic education. And so I would like to bring a focus of civic education back into our schools. I believe it's really important to have an informed citizenry to make our democracy functional. And so that would be another one of my main focuses. Additionally, and on top of that, I think that there's been a real problem with the relationship between our community and the district, especially in the last year. I believe that the role of the school board is to be the liaison between the community and the district, and right now there hasn't been a whole lot of back and forth community engagement, to the point where constituents are reaching out to legislators at town halls to say that they aren't feeling heard. So I would make an effort to actually engage with our community, hear their questions, and respond to them, make sure that they know that the board represents them.
Thank you. Dale?
Sure. I'm Dale Rice. I'm an investment advisor. I've been on the board for 29 years, and want to make sure that this district continues to be fiscally relevant and appropriate to all the needs of all the people. So I want to complete what we started. We started actually in 1990-91. We started with some bonds and reconstructing the district. It was in very tough shape back then. We got some bonds and we made some sales. I helped save a couple million, $1 to $2 million in negotiating some rates, helping negotiate some rates back then. So I want to complete what I've started here. So we have 500 million of bonds right now, or a little over 500 million. We have a remaining amount of 265 million to sell. And I want to make sure that we get the lowest interest rate for the taxpayers, which is the least cost to the taxpayers as possible. That's primarily what I want to do. And that 500 million, 400 million plus is about $1 billion of enhancement to the school district, which has been the source of great pride in this district for many years. And as a source of that, it's helped us, build the art school up here, iTech prep, and a number of great programs and such. So fundamentally, that's why I'm here.
Great, thank you. And Thomas?
My name is Thomas Higdon. I have no experience with the Vancouver School District. I have an educational credit, which is as follows. I have a 4-year undergraduate degree in liberal arts from the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee. I am running for Vancouver School Board because I know it can be just as important to thwart a bad idea as to promote and support a good one. I believe in fiscal disciplines. I believe that people are entitled to $1 worth of education for every dollar spent. I believe in school security, and I believe in a system which has no holes in it. Most of you are aware of the incident which took place in Park Grove not long ago, where a student entered a secondary, or perhaps you might say ancillary building, with a shotgun beneath his coat. The building contained no metal detector. You can't expect that a coach will be around every time a metal detector is not. Metal detectors are expensive, but against the life of a student, let's face it, there's no comparison. I believe in a traditional education. Most of the experts agree, and I'm talking now about curriculum, most of the experts agree that mathematics lies at the very heart of our universe and should be considered indispensable to a curriculum, as its sister discipline, science. We had some brief comment here from one of our other participants about student involvement in our government. We have a representative form of government, a peculiarly American form of representative government. And many students want to become involved, but unless they fully understand it, and this is where civics comes in, they won't be able to. Included with that should be an assistance upon an examination of American history, that they might understand exactly how it all came about as a result of the British and American Enlightenments, particularly. Above all, I require, or shall require if I'm elected, an excellence in English, grammar, spelling, punctuation, composition. Illiteracy should not be tolerated. When these students graduate, as inevitably they will, they'll be thrust into the most competitive environment of their lives. Whether it's the job market, trade school, or application to a leading college or university, they'll find themselves required to have a mastery of communication skills. And if they don't possess that, they have no hope at all. Let us endeavor to make them understand that social media shorthand is ephemeral, even as fashion itself is. I think I can let it go for that.
Well, thank you. Thank you all. Let's start with one of the big issues facing the district over the past year involves finances and teachers' salaries and led to a strike. And now the district is facing an $8 million deficit, and they have announced some layoffs for next year. We'll start at this end. How would you approach that? Has the district gone about that the right way? What should they be doing different?
Great question. So I want to, just speaking back to what happened last August in the negotiations, from a business perspective, I actually do think we need to increase our teacher salaries for competitive wages. I mean, we have a teacher shortage going on in our country. We cannot expect to retain a talented pool of educators without competitive wages. So I did support an increase for teacher pay. But fiscal responsibility is imperative. Our district cannot be moving forward with an unbalanced budget. It is an $8 million deficit. That works out to less than 2.5% of the general fund. I think $8 million can sound big, but it's 2.5% that we need to reduce from the general fund budget. I would say we need to take a fresh look at those line items. How is our spending, where is it effective and where is it not effective? What programming, if any, can we reduce or minimize? I think approaching the same line items with the same perspectives, we're not going to get a different result. We do need new voices, new perspective. Realistically, can we find all $8 million? I would hope that we could creatively problem solve. But the McCleary situation is something that needs to be fixed at Olympia. It might not be resolved in the short term. And so I think the school board is going to be tasked with some difficult decisions. How do we reduce that $8 million, or do we go back to the taxpayers? In principle, I believe in McCleary. I don't think it should be a burden on our local taxpayers, and I do feel like there's some exhaustion within our taxpayer community. So I would say it's a mixture of problem solving, a fresh look at the budget, but I think it is approachable. 2.5% is not an unsurmountable budget to kind of review.
And before we move, thank you. Before we move on, I want to really very quickly, I think it was Kyle in the beginning, mentioned the district budget. Caressa, did you catch that? What is the overall budget for the district?
What is the overall budget? I don't recall the exact amount. I know it's very large. I know that, in my opinion, I think that it is one thing to be able to balance a budget and to get to that final bottom line, but like you had mentioned, those line items that make up the total budget, that's where you really have to, be using your priorities and seeing, what aligns with the community's priorities and making sure that is really reflective of what we care about. Because the budget is a moral document. It shows, what we as a community care about. And so I believe that it takes communicating with the community to know where they want their money to be spent. And as for how the budget deficit is right now, there is a deficit, but there's also a lot of money in reserves. And I think that needs to be looked at first before we ever threaten to cut any staff. The community and the members of the schools, the people in the buildings, the relationship with them has been so damaged lately because they don't know where they stand with the district. They don't know if their job is secure. And I think being able to communicate with them about the problem versus just letting them know what's going to happen is really important. Additionally, the cuts were announced prior to the legislature even finishing their session, and I think that was a major problem. I think that the fact that Annette Cleveland directed additional funds towards our district really should have been taken into consideration before frightening the public. And I also believe that it's the state's paramount duty to be funding education. And over the last year with the lunch issue I've been working on, I have developed the skills and the relationships to work with legislators and lobby for our district, and I have been doing that. And with the lunch bill that I managed to get through the legislature completely, it sets up a grant program that I've been informed our district will be applying for. So not only do I see problems, but I'm also able to find the ways to bring resources in to solve them.
And Dale, I'll get you in a second. Thomas, do you know what's the overall budget for the school
I
district?
cannot tell you that, but it's information which is obtainable.
Yes.
It has little to do with policy, which I assume is what you want to discuss.
How many students does Vancouver have, do you know?
I beg your
How
pardon?
many students does the Vancouver School District have?
That I cannot tell you, but then again, that is also information which is obtainable.
Okay, but as a school board candidate, you didn't bother to find out what the budget or the enrollment was at the school district, is that your statement?
Perhaps if you would like to excuse me, I could go over to the library and discover
I've
that
got the
question.
information, I just was wondering if you really know. Thank you.
Dale, what's the district budget?
The general budget for this year is $324 million. When you add in the construction, student, and all that, you get it up to a higher $400 or $500 million. But the $324 million is the amount that you can deal with. The rest of it's pretty fixed.
And so what are your thoughts on the deficit? How do you plan to approach that?
So it depends on what part of the deficit you're talking about. So the deficit for this year is actually only going to end up being about $1.7 million. Next year, the budget deficit, what has happened is the Cleveland $6.5 million and the Vancouver School District coming in with $4.8 million has reduced with other adjustments, and we're reducing administrative people. We're balancing this thing with everything that's not in the classroom. In other words, there's no student direct contact person that will be this year reduced. So next year, though, when you take the 6.5 and the 3.8, you got $10.3 million. That's a problem. So if that's the problem you're talking about, and I assume that's where we were going here, because it wouldn't make any sense this year, but that problem needs to be resolved. The state, in their infinite wisdom, decided to cap our levy rate. So we were 2.63, and then they said, well, can't do that anymore because we're going to do a state income tax on, state state real estate tax at 1%. So it reduced us down to 1.50 as a percentage of the $1,000 per property. So in the process, in their vision of what they've done is cutting off, they reduced our resources so extraordinarily that we, for next year, will have to, they've given us, all districts, the opportunity to have a $1 additional increase, taking it back like $2.50, taking it back to the 2.63. So we could, not saying we're going to, we could go back to something close to what the funding source would be from levies. So this supplemental levy being offered. So we're we estimated we're estimating that about 51 cents on the dollar would resolve that $10.3 million deficit next year. So what we're planning on doing, or at least entertaining doing, is giving the population an opportunity to. We're going to do we're going to inquire with the community. Say, do you want to keep things as they are? Do you want us to go for 51 cents? Do you want us to go for $1? And if we go for or up to $1 or up to the same amount, then we could actually do more. We have a deficiency in the bus depreciation schedule, which is not part of this, but it's part of our future. So the state has reduced its allocation for buses. You buy a bus, and then the depreciation schedule. So that's all the districts going in the hole over that. So if we went to the higher amount, but we're going to let the taxpayers. Do you want to do the bus thing? Do you want to do the resolution what it was? Do you want to be deficient some, and we can start laying off people? 85 cents on every dollar is a human cost.
Thomas, what are your thoughts about the budget's financial deficit? I mean, the district's financial deficit.
Deficits and mismanagement are directly traceable. They're not undiscoverable. If an individual or a group of individuals can be found to be responsible for such mismanagement, penalties should be imposed. As to just what those penalties ought to be, that would be developed by a consensus of the school board. And a consensus is necessary because the board is a team that functions as one.
I was interested in what you said about the dividing line in student achievement north and south of Northeast 78th Street. I think certainly you can see that when you look at the school standardized test scores. What kinds of policies would you think would address that dichotomy, and what would you do to find the money to address that?
I think that's a good question as well. There is a one-size-fits-all approach right now in our district. I think understanding that there are each school has its own unique community, its own unique demographic needs. I think that's important. I think kind of engaging the building administrators in kind of leading and advocating for what's necessary in their school. The situation that's south of 78th Street very much relates to our low scores in our Hispanic and our ELL students, low-income students. That needs to be addressed as a district overall. But I think that what's interesting about your north end schools versus your south end is it does paint a picture of there's two different educational experiences that our students are getting. So let's attack our achievement gap issues. The state offers tremendous resources, an annual report that gives very tactical recommendations for how to approach achievement gap issues. We're not the only student or school district that has achievement gap issues. 1 in 7 students in our district is ELL. The majority of them are native Spanish speakers. One program that we've been discussing as a district is dual language education. We have the core foundation of Spanish immersion, and it is being converted to a dual language education. I actually moved into the school district with hopes of sending my child to Harney Elementary for Spanish immersion. We were with the program for 3 years. He moved on to Eisenhower in the highly capable program. One of the reasons we did leave Harney is because there is not an adequate track beyond 5th grade. There was a commitment that for our language instruction, which benefits both English and Spanish speakers, it would be a K through 12 program. It is not. So I think that there is a different level of administrative commitment in terms of executing some of these very proven and cost-effective strategies. I mean, we get $4.6 million to address our transitional bilingual program, and we are using an antiquated ELL curriculum, pulling students out of the classroom where they are not engaging with other students, where they're not in the active learning environment. Yet we have the foundation for a dual language education program that needs to be built upward from 5th grade and then outward to more of our buildings. We do have a new TOSA that has been placed, teacher on special assignment, that has been placed to work on kind of adapting our immersion program into a dual language program, which I think is a really productive first step. It is a first step. I question the administration's true investment, though, in a dual language strategy for attacking the ELL achievement gap. We formerly had a chief education officer that oversaw all of our language programs, our Mandarin, our immersion, our 50-50 Spanish program, and then the tracking as it evolved from middle school to high school. He was let go. He's no longer with the district. So we've replaced administrator level authority with a teacher on special assignment to handle and tackle a situation that's affecting 1 in 7 students. So I think there's a lot of ways to attack the achievement gap, given that 2 of the big groups that are being underserved, ELL and Hispanic, there's a bit of crossover there, as well as with our low income. So
you're seeing this as a realignment and a rededication of resources more than a new program that would require additional money that would have to be found somewhere? Is that
Yeah, I mean, dual language education is, I mean, there are case studies all across the country. It's been presented to our own school board. It's a very cost-effective solution. We already have a footprint. I mean, this is something that we build out and we build up through 6 through 12. And it really does then target several of the demographics. When my experience as a parent at Harney, and I was very involved on the PTO board and fundraising, there was a large homeless population. It's a very active and very supported FCRC. But that school community right there has your ELL students, it has your low-income students, and a high percentage of Hispanic students. So it's a great place to start with, but there are many other schools that could benefit from a dual language curriculum. And that is, I mean, Harney, again, it attracts students with native English speakers and native Spanish speakers learning together, and the outcomes for both students are improved.
Yeah, I'm curious, I'm going to play off that. Thomas, you mentioned earlier favoring traditional education. What are your thoughts about dual language programs? And
I know of no example which has profited as a result of such an enterprise.
Dale, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, since I'm one of the board members that created the dual language program, the Spanish at Salmon Creek and at Harney, and the Chinese immersion program, which is, they're being extended through the K-12 system as available funding and as available finding teachers. It's not easy to find Chinese-speaking teachers that want to live, you know. So you go through a process in this, which sounds like an easy solution, and it's not an easy solution. We didn't provide those programs for ELL reasons. We provide them because it's something everybody should have an opportunity to do. It's just smart education. We learned back when we started the first program that, which I didn't know, was if you have a K-5 system of Spanish immersion, it could be French, whatever, all of a sudden those students not only improve in language, they improve in mathematics, they improve in English. And it was kind of, when you saw the data, it was like, why haven't we done this years ago? So it's a fundamental thing that should be offered. My kids would have been in the program, they've graduated from the Vancouver system, but it's just a smart way to educate people. It helps them build their brain power and everything else.
Can I just inquire on that? Do you mind? Because I agree. We chose the immersion program for our child. It's 2 classrooms, K through 5, for the true 90-10 immersive experience. That there's no transportation provided, so you are looking at primarily accessibility issues. It is, I had the flexibility to drive my child to Harney every day. This is not an opportunity that is available to the average Vancouver student. So while it is a really effective program, and I looked at all of the research about the cognitive benefits for an education, it extends far beyond learning a second language. My son is left Harney at 2nd grade, and he has a beautiful Spanish accent. However, this is about how do we kind of leverage what we have in order to make improvements. I mean, we're not worried about, I'm not worried about my kids who have a parent that can drive them down Fruit Valley Road from Philida to Harney. I'm worried about the students that don't necessarily have access to those opportunities. And I think that's where our achievement gap really is centered.
Caressa, what are your
Yes.
thoughts on the achievement gap?
You said the word opportunity, and I see it more as an opportunity gap than an achievement gap. An achievement gap refers to test scores, and I don't think that test scores accurately reflect a child's real learning experience, because they could have been having a bad day on that test day, or not eating breakfast, or whatever the case may be. I think that increasing access to project-based learning is the way to go. We already have success in our magnet school program, and showing that is awesome. And I think that getting outside of that traditional setting of looking at a book and then doing the test, that will give kids more of an opportunity to apply what they're learning. So versus doing just, naked number math on a paper, they can, test soil or do something like that where they're actually seeing how these numbers actually turn into something real. I also think that there's a substantial problem with poverty in our district. We have a 48% free reduced lunch rate. We have an average of one student in every classroom that's homeless, an average of one out of 26 or 25. That is a huge problem because when kids are coming to school and they're hungry and they're tired and they've been, sleeping in a car or a tent, they're not going to be able to learn to their best abilities. And so making sure that their basic needs are met first is something that FCRC has done an amazing job of, and I'd like to see expanded resources to those FCRCs.
Isn't that, okay, yeah, you mentioned the FCRC. I was just gonna say, isn't that beyond the purview of the school board?
Is it beyond the purview of the school
Yeah,
board? I mean, I
but-
think if we're making decisions on the daily lives of our students, I think that that's something that we need to be considering and doing what we can to address it.
Mr. Higdon mentioned about school security, which certainly is an issue these days, and you mentioned metal detectors. Do any of you think that teachers should be armed? No?
No.
No, absolutely not. And I'd like to speak on that if I could.
Certainly.
Hang on a sec, let's get Dale.
Not necessary at this point, no.
Thomas, should teachers be armed?
I think, again, you have to go to a consensus. If you don't get one, you don't arm them. It's just that simple. I don't believe it's necessarily the case that that teachers should be armed. I think if you have a resource officer who is equipped to deal with problems which may erupt, this is an effective substitute for arming teachers, and I believe that's what we have at this time.
I'm sorry, Caressa, you wanted to
Yes.
say?
Absolutely. I think that when you put more guns into a room, the opportunity for something to go wrong increases. And I don't think that our teachers went to school in gun education to be teachers so that they could carry a gun and be a security guard. I think that they did that so that they could be educators. And I'd like them to have the ability to do that job and not have to worry about whether they're going to have to shoot somebody to protect their students. That said, I do think school safety is a major problem. And I think there's a lot of questions that need to be asked, and there's no quite right way to handle this right now until we have more information. But what I do know is I'm very concerned about the traumatic drills that our children are going through. On my son's second day of kindergarten, he got in the car and he told me that what he had learned that day was that if a bad guy comes to school, he needs to make sure to hide his shoes underneath himself. Because if his shoes are sticking out, the bad guy's going to know where he's hiding. And I don't think that's something that a 5-year-old needs to be worried about. I think that it's very important to make sure that our teachers and faculty and staff are very well prepared and have practiced what to do in the case of emergency, but I don't think that that's something that our children need to be doing. It makes them afraid, and they don't need to be feeling that, and when it's not happening.
I want to clarify, because when my student was kindergartner at Harney, there was actually an active gunman within the Harney community. He was armed and he had shot his neighbor, and they did put the school in lockdown, and it was a very serious issue. Unfortunately, we live in a very dangerous time. I don't like that these are the realities that my students face, but I definitely am committed to my kids knowing what to do at school. I mean, it's not the same age as when I grew up in the 80s. This is a very dangerous time, and there are mental health crises in our community, lots of guns in our community, and I want my kid to be informed. I will say the district has made some really positive improvements in terms of security and accessing the buildings. Since my student was in kindergarten until this year, they have implemented, you do have to scan a driver's license, and they know exactly who's in the building. So that is a positive step forward. I do remember dropping my 5-year-old off at school thinking, oh my gosh, you can just walk in, anybody can just walk in. And so I think the district has made some very positive steps forward.
Thomas, would you favor resource officers in every building?
I think that you put your resources where they are needed, and if they're needed in every building, then let's have one in every building. I would also remind you that the idea of backup is also something which can come into play here. Very recently, the incident which took place in Florida, I do not recall the name of the school, but I do know the resource officer refused to enter. He is now being held accountable for his failure to act. There was nothing backing him up at that time. It may be that the district would want to select one individual among all the teachers who was not only prepared but well equipped to use a sidearm in the event that such a backup becomes necessary. I would also suggest that when you impose a security system against potential threats, that you also install a procedure whereby unannounced monitoring shall take place to guard against laxity. Students who are afraid are not going to absorb knowledge. They're going to be far more concerned about preserving their physical persons, and that shall be their principal concern.
I'm sorry, Dale.
So let me make a comment. Other than my short, no, we don't need armed teachers. We have a huge investment in resource officers right now. Each of our high schools has a resource officer. We have investments in the security system. We hire security to monitor all of our buildings, and they do a great job. These people are on it, they can report it, they can do the 911, they have tasers and all this sort of thing. But if you have to actually arrest someone, you need a badge, and that has to happen. And that's typically the focal point has been at a high school. We had the issues yet at an elementary school or middle school yet. But these people are flexible. They can drive their cars and go other places and such. So we're very aware of what's going on. And, it's an ongoing thing. This is not something that just you fix with a resource officer. You have to have people get along with students and everything.
Are the resource officers armed?
Yes. We have relationships with the police department and with the sheriff's department.
I believe that they either work for the sheriff's office or the police department, and they're
Absolutely.
funded by Vancouver Schools, is that right?
Yes to the police, shared with the sheriff's department.
That's right.
Which I love the sheriff's department because they share the expenses. City police, I'm less thrilled with because they're like $100,000+ a year.
That was an issue a couple of years ago, I
Get
remember.
to buy their uniform, you get to buy, anyway, so won't get into that right now, but we need it, irrelevant of, what issues right now.
I'm curious about some ideas that each of you might have on curriculum and the content of what is presented to the kids. Anything you think needs to be changed or improved?
I'd like to answer that. I definitely do. I think that there's been a strong emphasis on reading and math, which is definitely important. Our kids need to know reading and math, but because those are the areas that are most heavily tested, a lot of their time is spent on those two subjects. I'd like to see much broader expansion of science, history, and civic education especially. Like I mentioned in my intro, I think it's really important for our democracy at large to have an informed citizenry, and that starts in education. I don't think that people should be getting to college not knowing who their representatives are, how, what the process is of electing their government. So making sure that our kids are well informed in the civic process is a major goal of mine.
I would say, more project-based learning. I can just speak to, I've had the benefit of my son going through Spanish immersion, and then in the highly capable program, they are able to work through the curriculum and work beyond the curriculum, and then have a lot of flexibility and doing some really creative projects. And that is where I see the light bulbs happening. We still need to have our students competent in math and literacy. So are there more effective approaches to it? I don't think that a 6-year-old needs to be spending day in, day out doing the same math worksheets. However, we are celebrating improved graduation rates, which is great, but we have declining math and literacy competency. So we do need to make sure that our curriculum decisions are preparing our students to be competitive in post-high school world, whether it be college or trade school or job. You need to be competent in math. Right now, Fort Vancouver has an 80% graduation rate, yet only 1 in 10 students can meet the state math standard. That is appalling to me.
Do you think, is that a result of the education they're getting, or is a lot of that the demographics and their background?
Well, I will say that our Hispanic population is about 2 points higher than the state Hispanic population. So the fact that we're behind our peers across the state shows that it is something specific in our district, and I don't think it's just purely demographics. I think, as a parent, or standardized tests are my least favorite days. My kids are exhausted, they're not excited about school. However, I don't look at it as it relates to my student. It is important metrics to look at district performance overall. So are there curriculum improvements we can make in math. I can speak to the elementary school level. It's not very creative as we approach math. Literacy, I think there's a lot that's being done that is creative in terms of small reading groups, some of the different literacy pathways of breaking into kind of mixing class students within classrooms and so forth. So I approve of the curriculum for literacy that my kids are doing. Math is fairly stagnant.
Thomas, your thoughts on curriculum?
I don't necessarily agree that this particular district being short against the other districts in the state as regards student Spanish extraction suggests something is wrong with the operation of the district in this regard. Equality of opportunity does not necessarily mean equality of outcome. If there's something other than a generality to offer on the matter, that would be helpful. If there was some specific thing you could point to suggesting that the district has failed these students in some way, something specific, that would be interesting. I would be very much interested in that.
I mean, grade by grade data shows that we are falling behind the state by minimum of 5 points to 11 points
But
maximum.
again, that's a generality. Please be
Well, that's
specific
performance
as to
data.
why this is taking place. That's important.
Well, and I think that's a good question, but what would you do about curriculum? How would you approach it?
Well, we already have remedial resources in place when people have difficulty learning, and that includes people who have English as a second language. I think what we need to do is examine whether or not those facilities are effective, whether they're doing their job, and whether in fact there are enough of them to handle the task at hand. If they're not effective, then we need to find out why. And if there are not enough such programs, we need to expand them to resolve the need, to meet the need.
Are there any particular subjects that you think we spend too much time or too little time on?
I do think there are occasional notions which bring themselves to the fore, which can be defined as folly, resulting in nostrums which are largely ceremonial and insubstantial. The problem, of course, is that the gods who rule over the world of passion and fortune are among the most fickle you can imagine. What is ardently desirable on a given Monday may be no more than permissible by the end of the week, and eventually, over time, irredeemably offensive. You need only looking at the glamour of smoking of bogey and coal, and you realize immediately that what is irredeemably offensive is the smoking. But at one time, it was a highly fashionable enterprise. There are a great many things which are born of fashion and which die like fashion because it's ephemeral. As I said, it's 100% ceremonial and insubstantial, only to be replaced by the next thing of fashion. Forced busing, oat bran, hula hoops, whatever it is, it's going to die, and it will die an ignominious death. What we need to do is fashion a curriculum which is constructed upon more durable values and values which have been sustained by human history and human experience. And to my mind, that's the points I made earlier when I discussed curriculum, and I would return to them at any opportunity.
And what were those again?
Well, as I said, mathematics has been determined to be at the very heart of our universe and should be considered indispensable, as is sister discipline, science. Along with that, civics and American history to afford students an opportunity to participate when they reach an age where they are capable of doing so. The better they understand the American form of representative government, the easier it will be for them to do so. Initially, of course, they'll involve themselves in some kind of campaign, whether it's signature collecting or working for a given candidate or whatever. But they will eventually mature to the point where they will vote and become perhaps candidates themselves. But the better they understand the American example, the better they will do it. American history, of course, affords us an opportunity to understand just how the American variation on representative government came into being and how it has prospered or failed throughout stress English, very, very, very important. The failure to communicate is something which I don't think we can afford to give to the students of the Vancouver School District. If they haven't the communication skills to get by, to compete, they're going to fail. And there's no excuse for that, none at all. Not when we also have an opportunity to reduce the rate of illiteracy, which is so characteristic of recent graduates.
Okay, thank you. Dale, your thoughts on curriculum?
I have none. No, I'm just kidding. So this is, without question, the most challenging topic in public education. So you have a state with smarter balanced testing telling you to go here, and then you have common sense telling you to go this direction. How do you make education interesting is really the question. And if a student is interested in the knowledge being imparted, they'll learn it. If they're not, if it's rote, routine, repetitive yuck, it won't happen. They get bored. We're very professional at that. So the old system is in conflict with the new system. We started iTech Prep as a project-based system specifically to try to show people how to educate students better. How do you educate them better? You put high standards in the projects, you make them do presentations, English, math, you make them do the whole thing. And what happens is we're working on a project that they like, gee, they don't care anymore. They want to work on more and exciting things. Ask me to do calculus. I'll learn how to do it. I mean, you get this sort of, I call it flipping the switch of the student. You know, if you can, the job of the school system and the teachers and everyone, my job, is to keep that learning switch to the on position. If it's in the off position, we got to find a way to get it on. Or it won't, they're just going through routine. So it's a tough one because you have a culture that learned things with, step 1, step 2, step 3. And we know that that's a great system for, 25, 30% of the population. And it's mediocre to awful for 75% of the population. It varies. So, is math important? Of course they're all important. But how do you get someone to want that knowledge? And that's the key to the whole thing. That's why iTech Prep was created. I believe the answer to public education in the future is in project-based learning, not in textbook-based driven. It should be project-driven.
And what is the enrollment at iTech?
iTech, 500. We're going. So we're 500. We're trying to get it up to now with middle school. So it's 20. You're trying to get it to 600, maybe 700. So iTech is so unique. We chose the students based on a random lottery because I was tired and the board was tired of picking all the primo students and running them into the ID program or the advanced placement or blah, blah, blah. So how do you get to the average kid, which I was one back in the day? And what happened is you got to get to them by giving them an opportunity and inspiring them. So we have a random lottery of which the student, parent can choose to participate or not participate. But we can't give it to them any more than, and it's done based on the zip codes of the community. However we represent, we pick that percentage of students from that zip code and we randomly lottery pick it.
Okay.
And it's an awesome way to get to the average person in the system. So we're trying to get there, and it's hard. It's a hard thing to do because there's a lot of rigid educational system. Kids learn one way, parents learn one way. Anyway, go ahead.
Now, is that kind of the consensus of the school board in general, or are they moving in the same direction, or is there some conflict there on the board?
No, I think well, I can't speak for every board member,
Right.
but the general trend is to try to, how do we improve curriculum? How do we improve learning?
Do they agree with project-based
Absolutely,
learning? Okay.
absolutely.
If I might have a moment here,
Yeah.
I would like just to say that sometimes you can draw inspiration from other educational models. For example, what goes on in Europe? gymnasium. Just examine it. Students declare a major very early in their experience, and they acquire a very good education because of the way their educational model is structured. If you examine it, you'll discover that a good many people find inspiration early. And I think this is what Mr. Rice was talking about when he talked about flip the switch. If you have the right circumstances, if you have the right educational model or the right teacher, you can ignite a thirst for knowledge in a big student. And it doesn't necessarily have to be the most promising. You never can tell where that fire burns. It might burn just about anywhere. Sometimes even a low-performing student has that thirst, and it has not yet been awakened. So I'm not sure if there's anything better than...
Well, along those lines, would you advocate adopting more of the European model?
I think it should be examined with a view toward employing those portions of it which seem to be easily inserted into our own models, and certainly the ones that appear to be the most popular.
So I just touch on iTech. I absolutely agree that it's a definite model for effective curriculum. Personally, I have a fourth grader who looks forward to entering the lottery next year. I think what needs to be reviewed, though, is what is the board policy in making more of those types of opportunities. When we are looking at 350 to 500 or even 600 students that have the opportunity, I appreciate the lottery. I appreciate that it is accessible to all of our students. However, what are we doing to impact the high student enrollments at Fort, at Bay, at Skyview, at Columbia River, for the students that aren't in specialty programs? I moved within Vancouver School District for programs of choice, but that's a small percentage. I mean, so what are we doing across the board to provide innovative curriculum?
What would you recommend?
I think more project-based learning. I think there's a lot of opportunity, I think, for collaborative classes. So when you approach American history, rather than just be history in textbooks, how do we incorporate literature and history together to create more of a humanities approach to studying that time in history and understanding the English complement to it? I think that there are dynamic ways to do it. Obviously, iTech, can that be rolled out district-wide? No, it doesn't scale like that. However, how do we create more of these programs of choice that do cater, just like BSA, to different interests, different motivations, but also how do we innovate, because those are always going to be the exception and not the norm of our student buildings. So how do we innovate the curriculum within our big high schools?
I'd like to answer the how of that. So this year, one of the bills I worked on was House Bill 2158, and that opened up avenues for apprenticeship opportunities. And I think that that's something Vancouver really needs to do. We have a super strong community in trades. We need to facilitate those relationships and get it started. Evergreen already has amazing programs that they're doing. It's a way of bringing, our education system and our business community and our community at large all together while providing students with amazing skills and opportunities where they can earn money while they're going to school and getting credits and leave school with the skills that they need to be successful. So we know that there is a shortage in skilled workers, and so we need to have people that are ready or trained to be ready to enter the workforce and do those manual jobs and labor style jobs. And not everybody is really going to want to or need to achieve a 4-year degree. So I think opening up avenues for apprenticeship, which now the state has provided support for, that's something we need to be doing right away.
I guess the last question I have today was about the power of unions and employee unions and education. It seemed to me like the McClary in the aftermath showed a lot of strength amongst the teachers' unions, and I'm wondering, do they have an appropriate amount of strength and say in school policy now, or too much or too little?
Who's that directed in?
So I wanted all of you to answer. If I want Start with Mr. Rice, the incumbent here, maybe.
It's complicated, as all these things happen to be.
Try.
Yeah, right, thanks a lot. Great question. So, what happened, we were in the lawsuit, and I'm clear, we were one of the first in the lawsuit to go after the state on this non-funding of paramount duty of K-12. So what happened is, with the good intention of the state legislature, and then they came up with some money, they didn't come up with enough, Supreme Court found them, and it went on for, 6, 7 years, and the reality is their settlement became confusing to not only us, but the teachers unions, and the way they presented information to the public. So what happens when you have $1 billion in the state that goes for all teachers, then the message is there's a lot more money for teachers, right? Everywhere. But what they don't talk about are things like levy equalization. So let me explain this. So in the state of Washington, you have affluent parts, talk about divide of affluence and non-affluence. So if you're at Lake Washington, Seattle, Bainbridge Island, Kent, wherever, you have an average home cost of about $1 million, roughly, in those higher end areas. In Vancouver, Washington, it's around $300,000. So, same tax rate gets 3 times as much money up there, okay? So, what happens is the state, in its infinite wisdom, said, we're gonna give out money to the districts like Vancouver, Washington, Evergreen, whatever, or other, over the Eastern Washington.
So late, right.
Exactly. So they don't have the tax base, farmers don't want, whatever. Which is good, actually. But what they didn't tell you is how much they're gonna take back from you. So what happened in this give and take back thing, it got very confusing with how much money we ended up having and how much money was available for salaries and teachers and other staff. So in the process, this became a muddled mess. So the union, the WEA union, got all jazzed about, we want money, I like teachers. Hell, I married a teacher. My mother-in-law's a teacher. I have teacher clients. I mean, to assume that I'm anti-teacher is wrong, or anti-union is wrong. It just, the way it was presented. So the complexity came down to this. Information was presented in the fall that wasn't complete, which wasn't fully revealed until the spring by the state as this thing's worked through. So if you have people behaving, mad teachers and unions and whatever, and they don't have all the information, they're gonna make some decisions that are in their self-interest, let's say, which we all do. So what happens is they start demanding monies, we're telling them we can't afford this, but the state at the same time saying, here's $1 billion, and here's this big settlement. So all of a sudden, we become the bad guys, the local school board, over the state, because the state's providing all this McCleary money, but they don't understand the math of how it's actually being divided and how much you get. It is asinine to assume we wouldn't get teachers what's due to teachers.
Now, and given that, within the district, how much did the average raise for teachers end up being?
15%.
Okay. And given
a lot.
the way you just explained it,
Yeah.
was that fiscally prudent of the board to approve that?
Good question. So immediately at the time, we couldn't afford it. So the question became this. So they're striking, they're asking for more money than we have. But in the adjacent districts, in Woodland, Battleground, Evergreen, the rates are going up. They're acquiescing and agreeing to these increased salaries. So the reality is, we could play hardball and say, heck with you, union, we're not giving it to you, whatever. So they're out indefinitely until there's an injunction served. I mean, we can play hardball with them. But the fact is the real salaries are now increased all around us. We're gonna eventually make the increase because we have to have fair and competitive wages. And the reality is we're gonna do it anyway, so kind of do it now and figure out what we can do to sort it out. So it became a mess because of bad communication.
So to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, it
Sure.
sounds like we decided everybody else is doing it, and so for now, we're going to spend money we don't have, and we'll figure it out later.
Well, yeah, I mean, what happened?
That doesn't add up for me.
Well, it's the way, it's the reality of it. So when you have teachers.
You think that adds up for taxpayers around here?
Well, it ends up being something that's the reality of it. So, would you rather not have your kids in school, on strike, disrupting families and kids, which is the choice, or would you try to come to some understanding of some settlement that makes sense that you could give over the next 3 years?
No, I can understand
Yes or
that.
no?
I'm having trouble figuring out how, you said come up with some agreement that makes sense. I have trouble figuring out how it makes sense to spend money you don't have.
Well, it's always a question. It's money we don't have for the system we had designed. So, in other words, when you spend money you don't have, you're pulling other people out. You're reducing programs to adjust for the salaries you just gave to someone. In hopes that there's other levy relief and other types of things in the future. We don't know the future.
Seems pretty hopeful to me.
Well, what are you going to do? Stay on strike for 6 months or a year?
Well,
Well, I mean, the point is these are tough choices. So
Oh, I
we're
understand
right in
that.
front of a levy,
Yeah.
all right? So we have a levy in the next 2 weeks. We, the Vancouver School District, had a levy. So the timing for this strike was genius on their part, because if we failed the levy, that is, consternation and confusion occurred, we'd have to lay off 300 people. So are you gambling? I don't know, you're gambling. You would be gambling if you said, hey, I'm only paying what I got and all that stuff. And they're saying, well, we got it over here, we're getting it over here, that was promised to the state, and again, they don't have all the information. So they're in our face in a way that you acquiesce or you don't.
See, and I wonder, from my perspective, I think taxpayers wouldn't call it gambling. I think they would call it prudent to not spend money you don't have.
So I guess if you don't want to have fair and competitive wages in the future and you know you're not going to do it, but we knew we were going to eventually get there. So the question becomes, do you spend it now or do you spend it later? That's the issue. And,
I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. No.
Thomas, thoughts on the power of unions?
This is the point that you were making. When you elevate practicality over principle, you're creating problems that you don't presently have. On the other hand, there is the question of going right back to the question of consensus. You're going to have that before you can do anything. So it isn't just one man saying, this is what we have to do. The board has to make a decision.
And I'm sure that's the way it played out.
Absolutely. I'm probably the most conservative guy on the whole enchilada. And I was willing to play the other side of that coin. But I was convinced that that wouldn't necessarily be the best for the students and the families and whatever.
I'm sorry, Thomas, go ahead. Were you finished?
Okay, your question was about union.
Yeah.
Could you be specific about what?
Craig, you want to ask again?
So
That's
do you
your
think
question.
that the teachers union has too much power?
I don't know. When you talk about power, you're talking about a very broad scope. What power does the teachers union employ? And in this respect or that, does it have too much? I think what you have to understand is that there is a distinction between private sector unions and public sector unions. Now, when it comes to public sector unions, the courts have recently decided that the coercion of dues is an abridgment of the First Amendment to the Constitution. As a consequence, a great many people are no longer required to pay dues. Nonetheless, receive the same benefits as those who actually belong to the union, even though they don't join or pay dues. And that is a circumstance which I know the unions abhor. Nonetheless, it's a fact of life, and I don't believe that the unions have too much power, but I do believe that on occasion they attempt to exert power which they don't actually possess, as when they defy a court of law, for example. And if the membership of the union decides to go along with a confrontation against the courts, then penalties are going to be imposed, and there's no getting around that. You can't avoid it.
Thank you. I think the unions gained a lot of power last summer. I think they did a very strong job at harnessing kind of the public interest in teachers. And I think a lot of people jumped on the bandwagon as a pro-teacher taxpayer or pro-teacher community member without distinguishing the difference there between the two. I actually received the union endorsement. I don't consider myself necessarily a union candidate. It was a dual endorsement, and I still don't really quite understand the role of the dual endorsement. But what I spoke is I think our teachers deserve the community support. I did clarify that I believe in transparency and open bargaining, which was presented to me as a red flag of why I wasn't the ideal candidate for the VEA. I think what happened last summer is an issue of communication, to Mr. Rice's point. I think that the average taxpayer does not understand the Cleary, and I think the average taxpayer was learning from communication that sounded good. And the VEA was able to spin a better story than the district. And I think by the time our superintendent kind of recognized that he was losing public favor, it was almost too little too late. So I think that was really a public relations battle more than anything else. I think the unions, I respect the right of collective bargaining, and I see the value in that for teachers. I do think there has to be a limitation. We cannot have special interests guiding our school district policy.
But to Dale's point, okay, if the alternative is having a strike linger, having kids out of school for months, is that a viable alternative?
It's not a viable alternative, and I will say, being in school and being active within the schools, I think our educator talent pool is one of our strongest assets. So I think we've got great educators in Vancouver Public Schools, and we don't want to lose them. Is it fiscally responsible to commit pay increases that we can't necessarily afford? No. I think the process could have been handled differently, and it would be great, I think, from a community perspective of going into these negotiations going forward. How is the district going to adapt or engage the community? How are they going to communicate? How are they going to start the process a little earlier so they're not kind of responding to outrage that the district doesn't like teachers? Again, I think it's a public relations strategy of how do we, and it's also a staggered increase. I mean, could we have committed to increases but been more creative in our solutions? So, hey, we need a couple years to make up some of this money. And I realize that that's some of the solution that was provided, but I don't think it was necessarily fiscally responsible, but I do think it was inevitable. I just wish that the process could have been handled better so it was not as divisive. And I do wish that the communication could have been a lot more effective from the district.
Thank you, Caressa.
Yeah, I have been supportive of our teachers union notoriously for the last few years. I was out there with them when they were striking. We brought water and snacks and sunscreen, and we were supporting them because without educators in the building, all you have is a building. The people that are giving my children their education are the teachers. They are doing the work. They are providing the education that the next generation is going to have, and I think that needs to be honored. Thomas, you had touched on the European model, and in other countries in Europe and other places, teachers are as honored and revered as doctors, and here it's not. They're just not. Teachers are paid less than the average workers with similar education levels in different fields. I don't think that's right. I'm very much supportive of them, and I think that they deserve to be paid accordingly, and it's important
so
for us.
So do you think teacher pay should be higher than it is now after the Cleary adjustment? Is it still too low?
I think it's something to keep looking at to make sure that we can maintain our compatibility with other local districts, and others are still more competitive than we are. So that's something to continue to look at. I don't think that it should be necessarily priority item number one, since this has been kind of covered over the last year, but I definitely do stand with teachers, and I think that that's important to support them because they're the ones doing the work and teaching my kids. And also,
But if the school board doesn't have the money, they don't have the money, what do you do then?
you go to the state, And I think that's something that we need to continue doing. It's the state's paramount duty to be funding basic education, and right now they're not doing that, especially if you look at special ed. A lot of our levy funds are having to supplement special ed, which is the state's responsibility. So right now, a lot of that forecast, the budget deficits are forecasted, and we have the ability to be going to the state and putting pressure on our legislators to provide more resources to our district, to all the districts, but to ours, especially. But I don't think that taking aggressions out on our teachers and kind of framing them as the bad guy is the correct response. Vancouver has historically been supportive of public education. We pass levies all the time. Our community cares about education. And I think we need to reflect that in the way that we pay our employees as well as the way that we talk to them and talk about them. And I think that the relationship between district employees and the district has been really, really hurt and damaged. And that's not productive for long-term leadership.
Do you think teachers were reasonable in seeking a 15% raise?
I think if that's what the state handed down to them, then they're due it. And again, they're paid significantly less than other fields with the same level of education, and that's not right when they're the ones that are
Well,
creating
isn't
our
that
next
their choice to
generation.
go into that field, though?
Do we want to discourage people from becoming teachers? Because we already are facing a teacher shortage nationwide. And so I think that phrasing of, well, you knew what you're getting into it's aggressive. It's not going to encourage young people to go into teaching if this is what they're seeing. So
So let me just comment. So what the state gave to us would have been an equivalent raise of about 6-7%, not 15. So saying we didn't give what they gave is wrong. So what happened was the rest came out of this miscommunication from the state about McCleary and what went on. We love teachers. I mean, we love, the unions are fine. Everything's okay, except this was a scenario in which miscommunication elevated to an excessive demand. I think some of the union people or teacher people were saying, hey, if we don't get it from them now, we're not going to get it, because the state was starting to take over more of salaries, which is fine with me. But I suspect that there was more kind of desire to do something now more than later from the WA perspective. So it ended up in a fight over, it ended up in a battle. It's never happened before in Vancouver, not over 30 years. So it's something that hopefully will never happen again.
And actually, we could go on about that for quite some time, but I think we should wrap it up here. Give us your final pitch for why voters should support you, and please mention any notable endorsements. And we'll start at this end this time. Thomas, why should voters support you?
Well, I think it's basically a matter of judgment. We talked, I think, to some extent about the fact that the school board is a team, and it functions as one, and therefore it must have a consensus. I think rationality is going to play a large part in what is and what is not meritorious in terms of any applications that the school board reviews or chooses to support. I would point out that I think it's a darn good idea to have the transparency which was discussed only a few minutes ago in negotiations, because it inspires confidence by the membership in the union's leadership. I also believe that the idea of charter schools is an excellent idea because it puts the Vancouver school system on notice that it is now on a competitive basis, and if it does not produce, it's going to get left behind. This is bound to have a positive effect. Why am I the best choice for position one? Well, because I'm basically a heck of a nice guy and I'm very well educated.
Great. Thanks very much. Dale?
Well, I hope, it's a privilege to represent the community. It's a real honor. I've been honored for 29 years, but I want to be able to complete what I started back in actually 1989, before I was on the board, when I was invited to task force to try to figure out how to fix the issues in the Vancouver School District. And those issues are fundamentally facility-wise and programmatically are significantly superior now to where they were back then, and they should be, of course. So We have 265 million of remaining bonds. I want to make sure that we can save as much money as possible, get the lowest interest rates, and save money for the taxpayers. I do want to say something else, though. It has to do with the poverty issue. We have 52% free and reduced lunch. And what happens is when you're dealing with this, we were having trouble getting to the community to get the kids in school. So we started something called the FCRC, which was mentioned earlier. We've actually received national awards for this FCRC, which is a way to put together resources from other resources beside the Vancouver School District to pool them. So, housing issues, health issues, psych issues, and we came up with this idea in order to meet the needs of some of these kids and families that are emotionally impacted and they're not interested in learning. So to assume Vancouver has not been doing great work over the years is absolutely naive. It's contrary to the facts. So, and there's a whole lot of educational enhancements, technology we've incorporated in the system, which makes things easier for a lot of kids. If you have, I saw an autistic child once who was doing tantrums in a class. There were only 6 kids in the class because of the high need, and he got an iPad, and for the first time he could tap a button and answer the question that the teacher posed, and he became a leader in the classroom as a result of that. That was a big deal to me. So that's the extreme version of tech. But tech properly done can be hugely beneficial to students and to their future, and it's a necessary part. So we're adding a lot of things, and it can appeal to a lot of different levels of need in education. And I'm very proud of what we've done. I'm very proud of the staff and how we're doing it. Can we do it better? Absolutely. But I think we're doing a heck of a job so far.
Right, thank you. And I'm sorry, any endorsements you want to mention?
I haven't pursued any. I'm not pursuing.
Okay. Caressa?
Yes, I believe I am the best candidate for this position because I am fully engaged in our community. I reach out to our community on a regular basis. I've been a parent advocate for at least the last couple of years. I've been speaking on behalf of what our students need, what our parents need at both the district and the state level. In doing so, I've built relationships with community organizations, with legislators. I have the ability to continue to advocate for greater resources for our district, and will do that regardless of whether I'm elected or not. I'll be still out here supporting Vancouver Public Schools. I've been endorsed by Vancouver Education Association very proudly, and Indivisible, Greater Vancouver, and there's a couple more in the works. I am fully committed to making sure that our students' well-being is at the center of every decision, and making sure that every student has opportunity given to them to be successful. I think it's wonderful that Vancouver has these amazing magnet programs. Vancouver's award-winning in a lot of ways, but I want to expand those opportunities, expand that greatness to all of our students, and make sure that they're all able to be their best.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Thank you. I believe I'm a good candidate for this position. I have a solid business understanding. I think to Dale's point, and he's made some substantial contributions with the bonds. I'm more than capable of reviewing that. I don't particularly feel that is the role of a school director. I do think we have a CFO on staff, and we also have ESD 112 resources to prepare, negotiate bond offerings. However, I think there's real value in understanding some of these bigger financial questions. I have an MBA, I have a long career in business, and I think I can contribute on that level and be a good advocate of fiscal responsibility. I also have a parent insight. I am in the schools on a day-to-day basis, and I think that that's important to know what's actually going on in the buildings. I think there's some relevance to spending just FaceTime, seeing what's going on in the classrooms. To the point of technology, my son has had an iPad for 2 years. I have not yet gotten communication from the district of why it's good for my child's education. I think we can be excited by dazzling, fancy new technology, but why was it implemented? How is it being used? How are the teachers trained to utilize this technology. There are, of course, going to be great examples of one student that can use an iPad effectively, but then there's also a lot more where there's students who are just sitting on iPads all day, and we know that screen time is not good for cognitive development and education. So, I think I'm a good fit for this position. I'm ready to make change. I think that our current status quo is not working. We have some great programs that touch a select number of students, but what are we going to do to really move the needle for all of our students? So I'm running really against the status quo. I want to make some good changes to improve the achievement outcomes for all of our students. In terms of endorsements, I did mention I had a co-endorsement. I still don't know what that means from the VEA. I'm a very pro-teacher candidate, but I am an independent thinker. I have not pursued that many of the endorsement questionnaires. There are a ton out there. I don't believe that partisan endorsements really have value in a nonpartisan position. I'm not going to be a special interest candidate. There are, though, a couple other organizations that I see as relevant to either my platform or to the role of school board.
Great, well, thank you very much. Thanks to all of you.
Thank you.